The Shadow of Death by Samwise Game Genius. This is really hard for me. I've been in a physically and emotionally abusive relationship for 7 years. For basically the entire duration of my marriage. And now you're probably thinking, oh great, not another abuse victim story. If things are so bad, just get the fuck out of there. But, like many people who have gone through this may argue, it's simply not that easy. No one would believe me anyway, because my wife is a tiny 90-pound woman with a charming smile and a well-groomed appearance. And I'm 6'2", 180 pounds with a beard. At the best of times, I appear charmingly disheveled. I'm sure there are a few chuckles going on right now. The thought of a woman abusing a man certainly seems to rest on a more comical taboo tangent. One that rarely gets spoken about because it never happens, right? It happens. Most of us are just too afraid to come forward and confess because being a man and admitting to abuse is akin to admitting weakness and failure. Men do not get abused, especially by women. My name is unimportant, my age is unimportant. Just know that I loved my wife. We'd been dating for a year before I popped the question, and I was thrilled that she said yes. She was beautiful, smart, and a talented lawyer. I couldn't believe that a dime like that would agree to marry me. The definition of an average Joe of average looks with a boring-ass accounting job and no other particularly remarkable traits. She made me feel special, I guess, but because my friends would take the piss out of me for admitting that, I put it down to her rack. The first few months were great. We had a blissful honeymoon, and even after we returned to our regular routines, we were still very much living up to our newlywed status. Then, around 6 months after we got married, things started to change. She became more possessive. I couldn't go out with my buds on weekends anymore because what kind of marriage would survive if the couple didn't spend enough time together? I couldn't go and visit my family overnight because she didn't like being around them, and she felt deserted whenever she had to sleep alone in our bed. It wasn't appropriate for married men to have female acquaintances, so I had to stop speaking to several good friends of mine, one of whom had been my best friend since childhood. I'd always been an extrovert, but over the passing months I grew reclusive, withdrawn. Quite a few people at work noticed, but I shrugged it off as work-related stress. My boss decided to give me a couple of days off, and that was the last thing I wanted because it meant I had to spend more time at home. That was the last place I wanted to be. Things got really bad when my darling wife decided she wanted a baby. By this point, we'd been married for 2 years already, and she decided it was time. I disagreed. We weren't as financially stable as I would have liked, and I wanted to make sure we gave our child the very best we possibly could. I tried explaining that to her, but she wouldn't listen. She always knew how to pull my strings. It was like a performance. She could manipulate her movements and facial expressions and words in such a way that they broke through my anger and released floods of good, safe memories into my mind. And I could only see the woman I'd fallen so deeply in love with. You can call me weak, pathetic, a bitch, whatever you want, because it's nothing I haven't told myself over and over again. But she loved me and I loved her, and I would do anything to make her happy. So we started trying. Months passed. No pregnancy. We were both growing frustrated. We had some of the worst screaming matches because of our inability to conceive. "It's you," she'd scream at me whenever we started one of our rows. "What kind of man can't knock his wife up? What the fuck is wrong with you? You can't do anything. You can't even give me a fucking baby when there are drunken teenage boys who are able to do that by accident." I stormed out of the house that night, seething. I'd had it. I hadn't had a substantial conversation with anyone in a few years because of her. I hadn't seen my family. I felt like a failure, a sorry excuse for a husband, and I hated myself. So much for putting up with her, for believing she was right. I got into my car and drove off that night, searching for solace in the cold nothingness. I wanted out. I wanted out so badly. I couldn't do this anymore. I imagined our divorce. How would I go about picking up the pieces of what had become my life? What would I tell people? Why did I care this was the alternative? She humiliated me over and over again. I felt like less than a man. She was a monster. I loved her. As stupid and fucked up as it was, I still loved her, and every angry reason for leaving was met with a hope for a reason to stay. My phone beeped. It was my wife. The message was frantic, all caps. A desperate plea from a desperate woman telling me that she couldn't live without me, that she was sorry, and that she was holding a handful of pills which she would swallow if I wasn't home in the next few minutes. I turned back immediately. Things got progressively worse as time wore on and ran me ragged. She would shout at me for the most ridiculous things. She would throw my things out of the house and force me to sleep in the car. She would hit me. Slaps across my face. Later, scratches right down my arms and chest and neck that I did my best to cover up with long button shirts, even in the zenith of summer. And every time I threatened her with the law, she'd laugh because she danced around it for a living. She claimed to know how to make certain I'd get put in jail for causing her pain and suffering, that she could convince the judge and jury that her attacks on me had been incited, that I'd provoked her, threatened her. She even hurt herself just to provide evidence. I felt trapped. I was isolated. I was alone. I didn't know who I was anymore. The little things that used to bring me joy before seemed to wither away. I stumbled around my life like a ghost. When I refused to keep trying for a kid, she slipped Viagra in my drink. And when she still didn't fall pregnant, her onslaughts got even worse. I was useless, impotent, a waste of fucking space, and the biggest regret of her life. I wasn't a man. I was less than human. I eventually decided to end it all one night. My hands bled where the glass bottles she'd broken onto my palms had splintered into my flesh. Better than my face, which was what she'd been aiming for. She'd fallen asleep on the couch, her work splayed across the table. I made my way up to the bedroom as quietly as I could, not wanting to wake her. I wrote a letter, a long one, words that spoke to friends and family I'd cut out of my life for years, words for the woman who'd taken everything from me. And then there were the words in my head, the ones spoken in her voice that had me take out the rope I'd retrieved from the garage earlier. Useless. I tied the noose. Impotent. I grabbed a chair and I placed it beneath the curtain rod. Less than a man. What are you? Nothing. Worthless piece of shit. Embarrassment. I secured the rope to the rod. Just as I was about to kick the chair, new words and a new voice stopped me. Do not do this. I froze. There was no one else in our house. I followed the source to a darkened corner, where a figure in a darker shadow stood pressed against the wall. Do not do this, it repeated itself, then seemed to peel off the wall and walk towards me. Its voice was without cadence, lacking the definitive human tenor. When it moved into the light, my blood ran cold. It looked like a living shadow, like black vapor confined to clean-cut lines, the figure of a clay man. It had no face, no suggestion of features, no notable mouth with which to speak, but it spoke still. A surprising calm overwhelmed me, not the fear such a presence would ordinarily evoke. Why not? I said, far past caring that I was having a conversation with some kind of entity. There's nothing left for me anymore. She'd be better off without me. Everyone would be better off without me. I'm nothing, no one. The figure dipped its head, the slight inclination regal and practiced. So she says. And you believe her? why? She's my wife. She always saw the best of me, even when others didn't. If she says she's no wife, she's something else entirely. Look, buddy, you're kinda spoiling my plans here. Please, just leave me alone to hang myself in peace. I laughed then, even as tears rolled down my cheeks. The being was quiet for a moment, and when it spoke again, its voice was gentle, conveying a human compassion I didn't think would be possible for something that didn't even have a face. You are in pain. This I understand. You have spent years in this pain, and it has deadened you even before the lure of the noose. But you must listen to me now. It is not your time. Death is legion, boy. There is the unjust death doled out to innocents, for whom retribution is needed. There is the escape in death that certain souls bring upon themselves, the kind you sought tonight, but it is not as the peaceful pastures granted to those taken forcefully. It is an empty, listless, black existence that stretches out into eternity. There is the gentle death of old age, the parting gift of a full life well lived. My boy, that is the death meant for you. My tears increased as a strangled sob tore itself from my throat. I lifted the noose from my neck, hands shaking, and the rope disintegrated into ashes. Then there is the final death. The creature's voice turned hard. The death reserved for those who prey on their fellow man. To those who destroy and drain life, this is the death least desired. The death allocated to your wife, whom not only rendered you to suffering for years, but who has hurt others too. The younger sister she bludgeoned to death in a fit of jealous rage as a child. Her parents, whom she falsely accused of abuse and sent to jail as a teenager. She feeds off misery and hides it well. I have met many like her. I exposed them. I couldn't speak. The creature turned into a fluid movement and made its way to the living room where she lay. I followed dumbly, unable to form a coherent thought. It waited until I joined it. My wife still lay asleep, blissfully unaware what was to come. I hesitated. Was this right? She was a woman. She was my wife. I was supposed to protect her. The thing turned to face me, its expressionless face sending pinpricks of fear down my spine. Do not feel pity for this creature, boy, for it is not a woman. It turned to face her again and raised an arm. Inky tendrils solidified to form chains that snaked forward and wrapped themselves around my wife's leg. She awoke with a start and began screaming, as though the mere contact brought immense pain. The creature's voice was even as it continued. This is not a woman, it repeated. This is not a human. This is a monster. The anatomy between its legs makes no difference to the cruelty in its heart, and it must suffer accordingly. More onyx chains wrapped themselves around her limbs, and another one around her mouth, so she could not speak. It raised her up, her arms and legs splayed in a starfish formation. I have traveled this earth in search of those who knock on my door, those who tempt death, the ill, the downtrodden, the hurt. Shadowy wisps extended from its chest, heading slowly towards my wife's face, and she began to sob in horror. There are those whose souls I enjoy reaping, like ripe wheat, because I know that what awaits for them on the other side is a life more fruitful than what they've suffered in this cruel world. The finger-like members slid up to her face and began breaking down her flesh. Peels of the pale, delicately maintained skin began to slide off, like the skin of a fruit. But the souls who bring me the most satisfaction to claim are the ones like hers, black, withered, evil. I have seen many like those. Men, women, it matters not. Abusers, murderers, rapists, foul beasts deserving of what awaits them in my darkness. I could see the exposed muscle and bone off her face as it continued to rip off the skin from the rest of her body. Amazingly, she was still alive, jerking around violently, screams muffled beneath its chains. And I will reap them from their mortal shells like weeds, every last one of them, until the earth is no longer blighted with their evil. Its voice had begun to swell with power, rising above the muffled screams, the pounding of blood in my ears. I will expose the scum for what they truly are. My wife's face had begun to change, the nakedness of her flesh slowly rippling and wavering like an image cast over water. Her features contorted into a hideous demon face, teeth narrowing to sharp points, eyes bulged and glazed white with no pupils. Her former beauty traded for a wicked ugliness that drew the contents of my stomach onto the carpet as I vomited. I will cull the disease and smite the rats. It flicked its wrists and seemed to unleash death as its chains dug into her flesh and pulled her apart. A vortex seemed to open in the air behind her as her corpse was sucked into nothingness, not a drop of her existence remaining. And hell greets you with restless impatience. With those final words, the creature's tendrils receded back into the uniform darkness of its form. It turned to look at me. Begin anew. Live passionately and freely, more so than you did before. I seldom find those on the cusp of hopelessness in time to purge them of their demons. Use this chance, boy. It began to move toward a wall, once again sticking itself to the surface, until it became a two-dimensional shadow once more. Wait, I was trying to piece together my thoughts. People will think I killed her. What do I do? Not worry about that. I am thorough in my reaping. I haven't seen it since, but he was right. No one asked any questions about my wife. It was like she had ceased to exist in everybody's mind. I moved to a different city, began my life again. I'm still dealing with the effects of the years of abuse I've suffered, but I'm healing. Mine is not the only story, but it is one I have no doubt will rub people the wrong way. But neither gender, nor beauty, nor race, nor class should ever be used to discount evil. Death taught me that. I do not know what this being is, just that it seems to be some sort of death wraith, and that it has no tolerance for the oppressive. I can only hope that its reach is wide and that it drags as many ill souls to hell as it can.